I think we pretty well proved that with the most lethal disease the world has ever known.
Hmm.
You
I
know
see.
what that is? What's the most lethal disease the world has ever known?
The most lethal. Hmm.
Ebola.
Oh, okay. All right.
Ebola had a 60% death rate in Sierra Leone under the best of medical treatment. In other words, if you got infected with Ebola, there were probably a few people who cleared the disease without getting sick, but not many. If you started showing symptoms, your risk of death was 60%. And I looked at the biochemistry and structure of the virus, and I thought, hey, this is an ideal candidate for ozone, and maybe we can get ozone put on the world medical map if
Hmm.
this is done right. And I had been introduced to a doctor in Sierra Leone who knew the president, and we got a formal invitation from the president to come and bring ozone, and we got a lot of donations. And we were donated ozone equipment by a Canadian company, which has since gone under. And we took it over to Sierra Leone, and we were teaching doctors how to do this. And I knew it would work very well. I recruited Howard Robbins with me, and he is famed for his technique in DIV, direct intravenous gas, which is probably the most cost effective form of ozone. It's
Mm-hmm.
got issues. All forms have issues.
Mm-hmm. So you
And
guys injected the gas, which is a mixture of oxygen and ozone, directly into people's bloodstream,
we
correct?
injected the gas directly into the bloodstream, yes. And in the case of Ebola, well, we got in the middle of training doctors, pharma got to the government of Sierra Leone and through the World Health Organization warned the government that if they allowed the ozone project to continue, they would totally pull out of Sierra Leone and Africa.
Mm.
So we were essentially kicked out. Pharma knew about it, and they knew if we were successful, we probably would have destroyed pharma in Africa.
So this is a perfect example of the real opposition that exists.
This is a perfect example. I lived through it of not only the opposition of evil,
Mm.
pure evil, because that their action probably allowed another 1,000 people to die before the epidemic was over. By the time I was there, there were 10,000 deaths or so, and the epidemic continued. We managed to get to 5 people with Ebola
Wow.
after I was kicked out.
Wow. How many sessions did you have to treat these patients?
They were treated, I believe, 4 times a day
Okay.
with Robbins' DIV method, and all of them recovered very quickly.
Mm.
Like with Ebola, you're going like this, and then you get some symptoms, and then you just drop.
Mm.
You're gone.
How
In
long is
our
the time
case,
frame?
the symptoms might not start for 2 days, we'll say, and might maybe longer. It might be a 7-day incubation period. But once you start getting symptoms, you're at the precipice, and then you just crash.
Within
That's how
days.
Ebola works. We
Yeah. So
got to
were these people, were they at the symptom stage or were they very sick already?
they were at the, I believe they were at the symptom stage. In
Okay.
fact, the last one, the fifth one that you mentioned, at first I was told she was not at the symptom stage. A year and a half later, I got a message texted to me from Sierra Leone, a handwritten letter from her thanking God for ozone because she was
Mm.
symptomatic at the time. Her consort was Sierra Leone's chief physician.
Hmm.
He got to her, he died the night before of Ebola. She begged him to get ozone. He was a stodgy English trained physician who believed in Western medicine. He refused. He waited for ZMAP to come in from Switzerland, and
Mm.
while it was thawing out, he died. She then had armed guards at her door putting her in quarantine. She did not tell anybody she had symptoms, because if she did, they'd have thrown her in the tank, in the isolation tank, and she would have had a 60% probability of dying horribly, because it's a horrible death.
Mm.
And she didn't tell anybody. She was under armed guard, and she climbed a razor wire fence in her backyard to evade the guards, to get to our people, and got ozone, and did very well.
Wow. Brave and smart woman.
Hopefully, we're going to have a documentary made about this and feature that case.
Wow.
It's in the works. So, how does ozone work? And Ebola is a good disease to talk about in terms of the effectiveness of ozone. Ebola kills by depriving your blood of oxygen. It causes inflammation, massive inflammation. And where there's inflammation, there's cellular destruction. So there's bleeding, hemorrhaging, and that's why it's called hemorrhagic fever. It induces what's called a cytokine storm.
Mm.
In other words, your body is pulling out everything to machine gun everything in sight. And in the process of machine gunning the virus, you get holes blown in you too. And your blood vessels leak, hemorrhage, and your organs fail. Well, what does ozone do? Ozone has several mechanisms by which it enhances oxygen. Number one, it increases 2,3-DGP in the red blood cell. That enables hemoglobin to release its oxygen payload.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pretend this is a red blood cell,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going along, and it moves past the capillary and it doesn't release its oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
What good is it? It's no good. The train passed by and it didn't unload its cargo. Ozone helps it unload its cargo. Ozone also increases the flexibility of the red blood cell to get through the capillary. Red cell diameter is actually larger than the diameter of a capillary. So let's say that's the diameter of a capillary. Your red cell's bigger. It has to fold and flex to get through. Ozone helps that too.
Mm-hmm.
So you get better blood flow. Ozone increases the negative charge on red blood cells, so they repel each other. You don't want them sticking together. You want one cell at a time to move through instead of crowding up. Ozone has been shown to increase mitochondrial oxygen combustion. That translates to ATP. How do we know that? Because let's say this is your arterial oxygen level, and this is your venous oxygen level. With ozone therapy, that goes up, your arterial oxygen goes up, and your venous goes down. Notice the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It increased. The difference is the amount of oxygen that left and got burned.
Wow.
Meaning more energy. So 3 wonderful ways you're getting more oxygen, which is going to help anything. We get oxygen combustion in our body, we have energy being made. All of our cell defenses for bacterial arise from oxygen metabolism. And what else does it do? Well, it improves cytokines. Bacci and Menendez from Italy and Cuba, respectively, have shown that ozone therapy modulates cytokines and interferons. And cytokines are pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. And Sylvia Menendez showed that ozone therapy in animals reduces something called tumor necrosis factor alpha, a really hot pro-inflammatory cytokine. And that's going to be highly involved with diseases like Ebola and COVID, because COVID also induces a cytokine storm. So that's part of the cytokine storm process. Ozone brings down these inflammatory cytokines. It balances. In other words, if your immune system is like this, it goes like this. If it's like this, it brings it back into balance.
Mm-hmm.
Bacci called ozone the ideal cytokine inducer. So that's yet another way ozone works. Another way ozone works is it is an oxidant. What does our body do to fight infection? It generates oxidants. And we were talking about hypochlorous acid a moment ago. Our neutrophils, white blood cells, generate HOCl, hypochlorous acid, and they throw it at pathogens. Well, it's an oxidant. HOCl is very similar to ozone. The mechanism of action is basically identical. These are germicides. They're not antibiotics. Bacteria can get resistant to antibiotics, and right now we are facing a crisis in worldwide medicine with antibiotic resistance. And it's getting worse by the day. It's literally a crisis. When penicillin first came out, it only took the bacteria a few months or years to learn to get resistant to it. And we come out with new antibiotics, and these bacteria are getting very intelligent, highly evolved, and they're getting resistant. They don't get resistant to germicides, which just kill. Antibiotics don't work that way. If bugs could get resistant to germicides, we would not be here. They've had 4 billion years of life on the planet to get resistant to germicides. It hasn't happened. They've had 4 billion years to get resistant to ultraviolet from the sun. It hasn't happened, or we wouldn't be here. So we're dealing with an ideal treatment. Ozone also induces, and I know people are terrified. When I first saw ozone at a meeting, it was an ACAM meeting. I saw it in an exhibit hall, and I said, ozone? Aren't we supposed to be afraid of pro-oxidants? Well, I mean, this was the time everybody was into antioxidants. They didn't know better. This is an evolving science. And they didn't know what they had. They gave me some literature. I took it back to my hotel room. And I'm not a morning person. I think you know that. And I got up at 7:30 in the morning to get to the exhibit hall 30 minutes before it opened to get that machine. I was so blown away by the biochemistry of what it was doing. And that was 1986. I took the machine back to Alaska where I was living. And after the first ozone treatment, I became an oxygen doctor.
Oh, wow.
Oxidation or oxygen doctor. We were just blown away by what it did for just about everything. And it's been most of my life ever since. Ozone also induces antioxidant enzymes, superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase. So these enzymes come up when you take a pro-oxidant. You're going to say, well, why? It's a pro-oxidant. Well, how do you build muscle? You build muscle by pumping iron, by exercising the muscles. So ozone is a controlled exercise for the body. By inducing a backfire, a pro-oxidant controlled, your antioxidant defense systems light up and come on. And one of my favorite things about ozone, and one reason why I do it, I think it's an ideal anti-aging therapy. It induces SOD, superoxide dismutase, and a key enzyme is sensitive to that. That key enzyme is telomerase. And we all know that as your telomeres, the end caps of DNA, shorten, the life of that cell shortens along with it. Now, we don't want everlasting telomerase. That's an immortal cell like cancer. But what we're doing here is we're slowing down, or we're repairing faster than what desired shortening of the telomere. So I consider ozone powerfully anti-aging. And people tell me that my skin looks pretty good. Well, that's not for me to decide. It's up to them. And I created ozone and a really high quality diet with that.